right, everyone, welcome back. And like I said in our intro, today we are with someone who is definitely a really longtime friend of mine, Ross, who is the CFO at LevelTen Energy. Ross, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Aram. And I wanted to start off by saying, one, I'm been super proud of watching what you've done with your business and with the podcast, and I'm a fan of many of the episodes. And I got to say, I was both excited and very humbled to be asked to join. So thanks for including me in the list here.
Absolutely, man. And thank you for those kind words. What a nice way to start our episode. I hope everyone who's listening to this take note. If you're ever on the podcast, start with a compliment. It feels
I want
nice.
The softball questions, so trying to put myself in your good graces as we get going.
I love it, man. Okay. So let's start with a little bit of background. You and I, of course, we met through punk and hardcore.
Sure.
And one of the things that I love about being able to do the podcast is not every guest has a history there, but a lot of them do. And what I love is how people take those things that they learned in punk and hardcore and apply it into the business world. So my first question for you is just give everyone a little bit of background about Allegiance and that being the main band you played in. But also as a part two, I'd love to hear about the transition from that being one of your main focuses to actually starting and really digging into your career.
Sure. Yeah. So Allegiance was a straight edge hardcore band for people who that's meaningful to. It started in about year 2000, ended about 2006, 2007, and it was like with a lot of I think people who are growing up in the punk and hardcore scene. It was a DIY kind of project, just with a bunch of friends who got together to do something almost fun on the weekends, and it grew out of control into something that it was. We were really lucky that it took us to the places it did, but it did so in ways that probably none of us expected or intended. So that was, it was a great adventure. Lifelong friends. Both inside of the band and in the community outside of the band, yourself included, took us around the country multiple times, took us to Europe for a month. So really can't say enough good things about what that experience brought to me in my life. And an interesting transition to my career side. Well, first on the career side, one, I was doing both at the same time for a while. So we started Allegiance while I was in college, going to school at Berkeley. My first job out of Berkeley was at one of the big four accounting firms, and I was actually doing both, which was a strange kind of dual environment, right? So here I am, big four accountant, auditor, telling them that I've got to save up all my PTO because this summer I'm going to be gone for a month and a half. Doing what? Playing in a punk band. It was very difficult to explain. While at the same time, in the punk and hardcore scene, it's not like being an accountant in a big four firm auditing major corporations is something that is. It's one, like, maybe not that common, and also two, it's not that cool, right? So it was one of these things where it was an early experience in being able to move from one environment to another and still remain true to yourself, right? So being able to be a hardcore kid in the business world and being able to be sort of professionally minded in the hardcore environment. And I think that I took some of that. One, I certainly applied a lot of the hardcore ethos to the way I do my daily work and the way I interact with people. But I also took a lot of what I was getting out of my education and my professional experience and applied that to what we were doing in the band. And some of the roles that I played in the band, I think, were influenced by that.
Yeah. And, I want to speak to that, just being really true to who you are in both those worlds, because I knew that you were in college. I knew that you were heading down like a professional pathway. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed so seamless. Like it never seemed like you were someone who was trying to hide anything. Like you weren't like, oh yeah, I don't want to talk about work. Like you would very easily talk about work and you'd very easily talk about school and kind of like what you thought your future might be. And it sounds like at work, you never actually tried to hide the punk side either. Is that correct that you were able to really just like be yourself in both spaces?
I was, and I think I almost had to be. I mean, and look, it didn't come without its challenges, right? You're in a counterculture environment. It's not necessarily easy to be the suit in the room, or you want to be. These counterculture environments are ironic in a way because so much of it is about fitting into the counterculture. Right.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of an imposter syndrome around, hey, I don't know, like I'm not wild enough. I'm not angry enough. I'm not jumping off of the tallest thing and doing the craziest thing because I'm afraid I might get hurt because I can't go to work tomorrow with a black eye. Right.
Yeah.
And at the same time, in the business world or in my professional environment or in school, it was what I was doing on the weekends was not common. And so it didn't come without its struggles, but I remember two stories. One is that PTO story, which was funny. The other was when I was wrapping up my undergraduate education. I remember one of the last finals that I had was a presentation in class it was an organizational behavior class at Berkeley's business school. And I wasn't going to be able to make the final because we had a show, I think in Boston the day we were like already going to have started our tour because the final was scheduled sort of after the semester ended during the summer. And I wasn't going to be there. And I remember going up to the professor, and I had done pretty well in the class the whole time, and trying to explain, just trying to figure out how am I going to try to get myself out of a final. I've never had to do anything like that before. And so I go up and I've spun this whole narrative about how the most interesting organizational behavior experience I've ever had is trying to live with 6 guys in a van for a month and a half, make it work. Everybody's got to pull, the same direction. You get in all of the interpersonal dynamics that you could imagine unfold over the course of a tour, right? A month and a half long tour across the United States. I mean, this as well as I do. And so what was interesting was she totally leaned into that. It was great, right? It was one of these things where I was really nervous about being accepted in that environment and having this other part of my life be something that was interesting to somebody else in the same way that it was interesting to me. And what I found was that here was this person with a lot of deep experience and knowledge in this particular sphere of education, and she wanted to know more. So she said, look, I want to know about that. I want you to teach me about that. Let's scrap the final. Who cares about the final? Why don't instead you and I meet up and let's talk about your experiences there. Let's talk about how we can apply some of these concepts in the class to what you're doing in your real life. And that was one, it was reaffirming for me too, or as one aspect, but also I think it spoke to that individual and the institution itself and the flexibility and some of the qualities of the education there.
Man, that is an incredible story. That's super cool. So did that essentially just become your final? Was that you were like educating this professor?
Yeah. We sat. I went back to the school, unscheduled time, office hours, and we sat for over an hour. And she asked me questions. I asked her questions. We traded stories. I was talking allegiance and hardcore and tour and who knows? I probably told a story about Aram, but these things all came up, and it was really fluid, and it was very affirming. And I think to have that happen early on, and because college is also part of your professional career. I think it's not a job, but it's the training ground for how you kind of learning how to interact at that level. And to have that happen that early on, I was very fortunate to have somebody take that approach, as opposed to you can easily expect it could have just been, hey, tough cookies, finals on June 8th. You need to be here on June 8th or you fail the class. It's that simple.
Yeah,
everybody else has to be here. Why are you special? Right. But instead somebody said, hey, you are special. That is interesting. That's different. Let's see how we can work with that.
And I love that story on all sorts of levels. And one of the things about punk and hardcore, at least from my experience, and I don't want to say this is true for everyone, I became more insecure about fitting in as I got older. And I'd played in my bands and done my stuff, but there's that point where it's like, well, actually I went all throughout university. I got these like advanced degrees, and I'm starting my career, and I couldn't I didn't have a peer group necessarily in punk and hardcore anymore. Like I couldn't talk to people about being a professional or what I did. And it's not that I couldn't, I guess I was just afraid to, and like there wasn't that space for it. And I became way more insecure as I got older in punk. As I entered the corporate world, I was super insecure at first because I felt I had to fit in. But the longer I've gone in, I've gotten like way more secure. It's been like a weird inverse relationship. When I started in punk and hardcore, I was super secure. You're just a young kid. You're a skateboarder. Everyone's kind of like, oh, we're all under minor threat. This is cool. But then when the stakes rose and belonging to that became much more important to me, and also like the clear connections to it became like less and less and less for me. It made me more insecure. But then as I've been in the corporate world, I've become way, way more secure. And that's not saying one's good or one's bad. One of the things that I found about punk and hardcore is that I think it's tempting or easy to get stuck there, because there's like a clear success that you can replicate. You play a show and everyone goes crazy, or you put out a record and everyone goes nuts. And this kind of like playing small, almost like I'm just going to stay in this little place where I know I've been successful, and I'm just going to try and do that ongoing. And not for everyone, but I have noticed like there seems to be like kind of like a tough space that people can fall in. I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
I think you're right. There's just sort of the more surface level aspect of that being a younger, angrier person's game, right? Mm-hmm. It's at least I know that's what attracted me to it when I was a kid, right? That mm-hmm. it was a place for me to express emotions and be connected to music and people that I wasn't having access to at school or in my family or whatnot. And that's a comfort zone, and you can get stuck in comfort zones. I think you can get stuck in any comfort zone, and you have to continually challenge yourself, right? And I think part of what you're talking about is, especially if you find success in that environment, it makes it that much harder to continue to push yourself, right? You can imagine that if the band you were in wasn't trying to be successful in the relatively small pond of hardcore, where especially in the era when we were doing it, it was so much easier than kind of, in the 80s and 90s when there was no internet, there was no, you could be reasonably successful for what that means in that scene if you tried hard enough and you had a little bit of luck. If what you were trying to do was, get on MTV or win a Grammy, you may not have become as comfortable as you did, because you didn't win a Grammy and you weren't going to, but you were successful for the environment you were in, and that really helps, I think, to entrench that comfort. And how do you continue to push yourself when you're looking around and you're saying, hey, I've kind of achieved what I wanted to achieve, or going back to my intro on Allegiance, achieved way more than I ever thought was possible or was the point, yeah. Right? And so how as a band or how as an individual do you push yourself to do more, reach more people, spread another or different message, or you just stay interested and dynamic in any case?
Yeah. And man, you hit right on it. Like, and I don't want to imply staying like still putting out records or anything. There's anything negative about that. Like, for example, you've got some bands like Sick of It All who've made a career out of it, yeah. And like literally that's their career. That's awesome. And you also have some people who just do it as a cool creative outlet. Like, I mean, like, like who's to say how many more records you and I might be involved in, right. In the rest of our lives. And I think that's cool. The difference, I guess, between getting stuck or hiding versus like just allowing it to be like a cool creative outlet, something you like to be involved in. And for me, I can definitely say at one point, I know I was hiding. Like I was like not, I was playing small. I was just sticking to the place where I really knew like, hey, this is a well I could just keep going back to. And like, I can, I can get what I need from this thing. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was like, it had stopped pushing me. Like you said, it had stopped stretching me. It had stopped, challenging me and making me a stronger, better person. And instead, it was just like kind of like a lesser and lesser and lesser iteration of who I wanted to be. And when I really like made a choice to start focusing on like my career and do all those things, it was so weird because I didn't have that like constant feedback cycle of like that crazy show you had or that record where it was like you're doing a good thing. It was more like, oh, I was one of many, many, many people who were young professionals, and you had to kind of like lift yourself up a little bit more. Did you ever experience anything like that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can think about instances where, especially beginning my career, when I moved out of the accounting sphere into corporate finance, which was transition for me. I remember, and I was still doing Allegiance at the time, right? So you have to imagine on one side of my life, I've got this experience where you're on stage, and that time when you're in the middle of a song and the song like stops for a beat, and the audience is looking at you, almost like asking you what's coming, what are you about to do, and then you hammer drop that just huge riff on them, and the place erupts, and you get that just instant feedback of man, you're killing it, and you are reaching us, you're doing exactly what we want. And so that's something that I was really fortunate to be able to experience from time to time as part of that environment. And now I'm in a boardroom with a group of professionals, executives, and I'm giving sort of early presentations, and you build these things up in your mind. You try just as hard to write that deck and get that message across as you do putting that riff together. And you sit down at the table, you've got your button-up shirt on and everything. Everybody's around you. Somebody introduces your topic, the table stops, looks at you in that same kind of way, and you give sort of this stunted, stuttery, I'm nervous, I'm not confident, you stumble over this thing, and the table does not get up and start circle pitting, off of the riff you just dropped about, what's happening with headcount in the company or something like that, right? And so on the one hand, you both have to get used to the fact that you don't get the same response in every environment, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't think I could have had the confidence to get through those types of presentations and to learn and to say, hey, I didn't get the reaction I wanted. What could I do differently to get the reaction I want? If I didn't have that experience being on stage in front of hundreds of people, doing something I loved, getting a great reaction and getting that support. I mean, in high school, I was the kid who, I'd have my little speech and I'd have it down. I'd be super confident. I've got this. I rehearsed it a dozen times. I know exactly what I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it. I'm going to nail this. I'm perfectly okay. And then the moment I open my mouth, it's just nothing. I've got nothing. I'm beet red. I'm stuttering. I'm sweating bullets. And that was me, right? And I couldn't speak. And hardcore changed that for me. I mean, it really did. And it gave me this sense of being able to be at the table. And sometimes it goes really well. Sometimes it doesn't. That doesn't really matter what happens in the moment. What happens is, how do you take that feedback that you got, whether it was overwhelming, underwhelming, and reconfigure what you're going to do for next time so that, you do get that.
Yeah. And dude, when you said that like pause where it's the riff, I instantly thought of My Pledge, that intro, like da na 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 na.
No, exactly. And your whole room guitar up and you're just looking around like, who's going to bring it? You know?
Totally, man. You know, it's funny that you're saying all this. Like when I was working in the not-for-profit sector as like a therapeutic setting, my first few roles were all with a boss who was from the punk scene. And I never really had real reviews. Like my reviews were always like, hey man, you're doing a great job. It'd be like, awesome, man, you too. And then we'd like talk about Youth of Today or whatever, right? Like it wasn't like real world. I remember the first time I had like an actual real review from a boss that wasn't from the punk scene. And it was fine. It wasn't a bad review, but I was pissed. And I literally was thinking like, who the hell are you to critique me? And the thing is like, your boss, like that's who that person is. But my brain didn't operate on that because I'd come from this culture where it's like so DIY, you kind of make your own rules. But on the flip side, it's actually like, it sets you up to make you so daring and such a risk taker, but it also can give you a sense of like non-reality because then you're in that space where it's like, well, no, like you gotta have like grit to be a professional and like real grit to be able to be professional and to be who you are while also being willing to learn.
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting concept because that almost it can be a bit of a disrespect for authority or a real pushback for authority that comes out of that environment. And I understand where that comes from, and I have some respect for that. And I think that there's a certain degree of that that's necessary to keep us as individuals and as societies and companies and industries and everything, just keep it moving forward. You have to have a certain amount of willingness to push on the status quo. At the same time, you do have to, at some point, if you want to get better at what you do, you have to be willing to listen to somebody who's better at you at doing it and get your advice. Now, I think that unfortunately, I think we've all had managers who are just surly, mean individuals. I'm your boss. I want you to do it this way. I want you to do it that way because that's the way I want you to do it. I want you to shut up and just, you did it wrong. And then I think you can have people who are giving you feedback, and it's developmental feedback. It's maybe, they're telling you that you could have done a better job, but they're really doing it because they're interested in being a steward of you as a professional and as a person, and they want you to get better. They want to develop you. They want to mentor you. And I've been very fortunate in my career to have several, managers who fit that category, who are, they're more of the mentorship mode and who were effective at getting me to trust their feedback. And I think that that's a huge part of it, right? If you trust somebody and you trust your manager to be giving you that feedback, it means it's much different than, it's like, shut up, mom and dad. Like, you don't know what it's like. It's not that. It's more, hey, I have a ton of respect for this person and what they do and how they do it. And they're telling me that I could do something a little bit differently. And so I'm going to listen to that. And I think that you can get that from the punk and hardcore scene too, right? Either as bands, you listen to bands that you respect, and bands take you out on the road, bands do stuff for you, and they teach you the ropes. They teach you how this works. They teach you, how to, whatever it is, how to record better records, how to play better shows, how to reach a larger audience. And so there's a parallel for it in that environment as well. I think it's just about, one, finding people you trust, and two, being willing to take advantage of it.
What I'm hearing too, and it was just occurring to me as you were speaking about it, like maybe that shift from contempt of authority to curiosity about authority. And like, you could, like, I'll say just for myself, like I'd come in and be like, yeah, I guess you're my boss, but like, I'm the shit. Like I know what I'm doing. And how limiting that was for my early career versus, and also like I would seek out like punk bosses so I could kind of like hide in that world. But contempt of authority or leadership to curiosity. And the curiosity would be, one, well, actually, can you do things better? Is what you're doing ethical? Like, can we like change the industry? Can we push things? Can we push our standards? But also like, what do I have to learn from you? Like, where can I get better? And that shift from like contempt, that kind of blind contempt, to more like curiosity. Well, not also like leaving out like, it's going to be some level of skepticism, but like real curiosity. I think that's like, at least for me, and it sounds like a bit for you as well, that's been like a hallmark of growth in my career.
Yeah, for sure. One of the ways that I think about that, or what you were saying reminded me of, are conversations I've had that are disagreements, right? Mm-hmm. Things where I disagree with how you did that. And not just, I think you could have said 10 instead of 8. Like, I have a fundamental disagreement, I feel like, with what you did there. And I've also been been very lucky to have bosses who are willing to entertain those conversations with me. And I think that one of the responsibilities we have as people who want to push against authority is that you get to ask questions, but if you're going to ask questions, you have to listen to the answer, right? I mean, if you want somebody to respect your question, respect their response, and really try to work with it and try to play with it and give them the opportunity to be responsive. And those are some of the best conversations I've had. And thinking back to, good management, good managers, things that I try to emulate, when I work with people who are on my teams, is one, there's that feedback piece, but there's also that willingness to entertain conversations about challenges, to be challenged and to not be sort of threatened by that, but instead use that as an opportunity to have a conversation with your colleague about why you do things the way you do it, why they might do things a little bit of a different way, and see if you can come together on that.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to ask you kind of mirror questions. What's something that you learned about yourself solely from the punk scene? You didn't learn about it from your personal life. You didn't learn about it from your professional life. What's something that you learned about yourself solely that you learned from punk and hardcore?
That I could be comfortable in very uncomfortable environments, right? I grew up, I was very fortunate to grow up in, what I think is, I was cared for as a child. I had food on the table, always had clothes on my back. I never had to necessarily worry about our housing situation. There are so many challenges that kids grow up with that I didn't have. Right. And it doesn't mean that, I didn't grow up super wealthy. But I had a lot of things that I didn't have to deal with that a lot of people have to deal with. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that for most of my life, I wasn't very uncomfortable.
All right.
And I think that it wasn't until, whether it's, trying to use the bathroom at Gilman or living, like I said, living in a van with 6 people for a month and a half and doing all that, or getting into altercations with, people who are in aggressive situations or otherwise, really being forced outside of comfort zones and being, you've got to sink or swim sort of, because there aren't necessarily going to be people there to hold your hand the whole time. So I think that's something that up until that point in my life, that was the first place that really gave me that poke. Like, hey, you are, almost this feeling of like, hey, you are not safe here. Figure it out.
I love that. All right. So now here's the mirror question. What have you learned in your professional journey that you didn't learn anywhere else? Something that you learned about yourself through your professional sphere? I
think the thing that I learned most about from my professional sphere is and this is a little bit ironic because of some of what being a part of hardcore is, but I don't think it was actually until my professional life that I felt like I was a part of something bigger and how important that was for me. And, I think it's not to say that, being a part of the straight edge movement or being a part of hardcore wasn't important to me. It was, but looking back on it, I don't think it wasn't as life defining as I would have probably wanted to believe it was at the time. I'm still very much into hardcore. I'm still straight edge. Like, these things are part of my life, but it's not sort of like the thing that I choose to tell people about myself or something like that. And I think I get much more satisfaction out of being a part of something that is trying to change the world on a global scale, like renewable energy. This was a big part of the change in focus for me when I moved away from public accounting and into corporate finance. Happened very fortunately to land at a renewable energy company, really by happenstance, and locked onto that and became a part of something that is really endeavoring to change the lives of everybody across the globe. And it feels really good to be a part of it. It's motivating. And I think it took me outside of myself in a way that earlier in school, I was a high performing student. I raced in swimming. I did all of these like individual pursuits, right? Like I was on the swim team where I swam by myself. I was on the tennis team where I played singles tennis. It was just, everything was about individual achievement. And I think it wasn't, really until I started to become successful in my professional career and looked around and saw, Ross Trenary is not really being successful here. This company is successful. This industry is successful. I'm successful because everybody else is around me. And I think that that's something that I don't think I really appreciated about myself until I really, my career started to take off.
Man, I love that. And I feel that so deeply about the work that I do with clients, but also about the company. Like, the company is like, it's weird because like people in the company are like my friends, but they're also like my team. And I'm so much more rewarded by their success than I could ever have imagined. But now, like, we've hit into your career, so let's talk about your entry into renewable energy and also how you've seen it change over time.
Sure. From an entry perspective, like I said, it was a bit happenstance. It was actually. We're never going to escape hardcore in this conversation. It was actually the vocalist of Allegiance. It was his father who had taken the chief financial officer position at this renewable energy company. And he knew I was looking to leave this accounting firm. And so he called me up one day and said, "Hey, are you still looking to leave there? I need a corporate finance person. Do you want to do this?" Sure. So I joined the industry that way. But I was lucky to join the industry. That was back in 2006, when it was a much smaller universe than it is today, and it's changed tremendously. And in a lot of ways, one, it's gotten so much bigger. It's sort of outrun some of the sort of like subsidy necessity that it had in the past. It's kind of become economic in its own right. It's become valuable in its own right. More of the world is actively fighting climate change and looking to this as a positive alternative to producing energy through fossil fuels. The other thing that's happened to it, I think, that is a huge part of the industry today is it's gotten vastly more complicated. And that's the part that's exciting, right? I think that especially as a young professional with a whole career ahead of you, and how tragic if you fall into something that is just kind of going to run on autopilot for the next 30 years. I couldn't have seen it coming. I'm not that smart of a guy, but it was really fortunate that I fell into something that has been so dynamic. And the work that I do today, and the people I do it with, the companies that are in the industry, what the industry is doing, the global regulatory environment, all of it it just doesn't look anything like what it looked like in 2006.
Well, and it's interesting you're saying that, because like renewable energy I mean, when I was a kid, it was just kind of like, oh, solar energy, like there was like that thing, but now it's becoming like this huge, it's not becoming, it has become this huge industry, and the interest in it has really spiked. But of course, the demand, I believe, has kind of outstripped the ability of the providers to be there. So what do you do from an industry perspective when the demand for renewable energy is outstripping your ability to give it?
Well, hopefully your elbows get a lot less sharp. Right. I think that as companies and as professionals, you start to realize that, look, I can try to make sure that $1 that's out there right now lands in my bank account. Or what I can try to do is, look around and just try to make the industry as a whole more successful. And by doing that, I think you do maybe two things. One, you prove that you actually stand behind your mission statement, which is generally not for a renewable company, be as profitable as possible, right? But something to the extent of accelerate the energy transition or something that sounds pretty benevolent. So you actually show people that you stand behind that mission statement, but also you make the entire market bigger, you make the industry bigger, and you make it so that the dollars that are available to you later, there's more of them, and it's easier to get them, and we're all better off as a result. So I think you start to collaborate more. You start to look around and say, look, like there are customers that aren't getting served. I can't serve them all. Maybe there's a way that we can collaborate and do a better job together. I think the other thing that you do, and this is something that the company that I'm at now, LevelTen Energy, this is something that we've done, is that you start to look at why is that happening, right? Why can't supply keep up with demand? And a lot of times I think what you would find is that there's an infrastructure gap, right? So there's something in the way that people do things or in the way that people can't do things, that there's an efficiency that's required that allows for the entire supply marketplace to do more, better, faster, cheaper, and so on.
So an energy company, is it like, you're not going to be like, our goal is to make all the most money. It is something you're going to have more of a benevolent mission statement, but that doesn't mean that there's not like corruption in the industry. And in fact, there can be like people who are going about something that's a noble cause, but they actually are doing it just to make money. So I love that idea of your elbows getting a little less sharp, and hey, I'm not going to fight for that $1 to come to me. It can go to someone else in the industry to be able to really have for the supply to meet the demand. We actually have to have much more of a communal response as a market. And I think that's super cool. So with that though, in your pre-interview, something you'd mentioned about LevelTen is that you have this like one goal mantra, and that you just like really dedicated to transparency. So what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that's true. And there's a little bit of what I said right there makes it's a good transition, because there's the surface level of what one goal, sort of how it came to be, and then there's the deeper level of how you operationalize something like that, or really try to live it. And that's probably true with any good mantra or hashtag, so to speak. But so it came about because really, if you look across all of the companies in the industry, almost all of them, as a stated goal, have accelerate the energy transition, or accelerate the clean energy transition. And so really it was, part of it is just a literal point out of, hey, we all have one goal. All of us. I have it. All of my competitors seem to have it. All of the sort of parallel companies that are through the industry doing a little bit of different thing, but supporting it. We all have this same goal. So, hey, it appears we have one goal. And so that was an interesting observation that was made, and where the sort of the statement came from. How it's been operationalized, it completely flipped the strategy of this company on its head, where what the company was trying to do initially was compete with all of these other energy advisors. And again, there's this issue of sort of, well, we're maybe going to reach one customer, they're going to reach 30 customers. We're all sharp elbowed and jostling around trying to win. And why don't instead we as LevelTen, the good thing that we could do was technology. We had technology, we had infrastructure. And we said, all of these other companies have the same goal that we do. So rather than trying to ace them out of that particular customer, why don't we just focus on making our technology really good and getting all of them to use it? And so rather than, sort of beat them, we will make them all better. And that will be our business. And that, I think, was transformational in terms of the company's mindset, in terms of its position in the industry, and really what it's trying to do. And it encapsulates a bit of that conversation we had earlier.
Yeah, I love that, man. So let's take a step into people leadership. You're in the C-suite now, like CFO. That's a big title. It's a big role. And for some companies, that just literally means you're like, oh, I'm just like one person. I don't really, it's just like a title. And for other people, it means you're like leading like literally hundreds, if not thousands of people. You've obviously like helped develop people. You've probably had to let people go in the past. So you understand professional development. So just like punk and hardcore, and just like basically anything in the world, gatekeeping is an issue. So if you think about from a development standpoint, a leadership standpoint, what can you tell us about gatekeeping in the professional world, and how do you push back against that as a leader?
Look, gatekeeping's everywhere, right? You see it. There's always somebody in a position of power who enjoys that for one reason or another and wants to keep it, and they view bringing others along as a threat to that position of power. Again, I've always been fortunate to not have bumped up against too many of those people. And one of the things that was always very empowering for me as a younger professional was this idea that, hey, you did the work, you should be in the meeting. You're a part of this process, you're a part of this project. We're going to present it to the CEO, or we're presenting it to the board. But I want you to at least, if nothing else, at least be an observer to that part of the process, and bring people along. And I think that one of the worst things that you can do for a growing professional is to box them out of those types of experiences. To keep them out of rooms. I think that it's stunting, and it also keeps, this is, as a leader, you have to remember, this is the person that's going to do the work the next time, right? I'm not, they crafted a presentation. Maybe I'm going to give the presentation, but I'm going to ask them to craft it again next time. And how much better will it be if they watch me give it and can be a part of that feedback session, hear directly and see it directly, what worked, what didn't, what made the table get up in circle pit, but it's that type of effort, right? And you get a better result. You get a more motivated colleague. There's so much reward. And I think for people who can tap into that and see that you get a better product if you're a better leader, I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, man, I love that so much. And gatekeeping is really everywhere. And I know the experience of it in hardcore, where you're like, damn, like, hey, we're all just people trying to find ourselves. We're just kids. We're trying to figure it out. And feeling like, oh, that feels really bad, to the times where like, damn, did I gatekeep you there? Was I being like that? And then also in the professional world, where it's like, I have bumped up against people like that professionally. It's like, damn, there's plenty of space for everybody. You just gotta go from an abundance model rather than feeling everything's a scarcity. And we can lift people up if we do it from the right perspective with the right way. But with that, I'm going to ask you 3 more questions as we're closing off. The first one's a doozy though. Okay. You today, as you are today, in the professional world and your personal life and everything you've learned from punk and hardcore, but also just from being a person. Today, how do you define success and how do you define failure?
I think with success, it's a oneness. It's am I living my life consistently? Am I the same person? Do I show up as the same person in this room and this room and this room? And if I brought 10 people from my life who don't know each other together, they would all have sort of a consistent experience, right? They would know the same person. I think at different parts of my life, that wasn't always true. And I think that led to a lot of sources of unhappiness or dissatisfaction or feeling like I wasn't quite where I wanted to be. had something to do with that. And I worked hard at it, right? We talked a lot about showing up as the same person in hardcore as showing up as the same person at school and showing up at the same person at work. And in some cases I was successful at it. And maybe I brought up that example at that point in the conversation because that is a meaningful indicator to me of when I was being at my best, sort of, and being successful. And that, when I'm not consistent is sort of an indicator of not being as successful, I suppose. And when it comes to failure, I think that as the biggest thing that I think about is when people who are looking to me for help or guidance or support, when they don't succeed. Right. So whether it's, I have a 7-year-old son, whether it's him, and he's trying to learn or figure something out and he's not getting it. And part of him not getting it is maybe that I'm not spending enough time, working through it with him, or it's at work and somebody's struggling with something and they struggle with it over and over and over again. And maybe it's that, my feedback's not the right feedback or something like that. I think that those are the areas where failure hits the most home, where somebody's depending on you. And I almost define my own failures by other folks in my life struggling to find success.
Really brilliant answer, man. Really strong. All right. Last 2 questions. Now, these might be harder questions. I don't know.
We'll see.
All right. Second last question. Top 3 for you. And you could change your answer tomorrow, next week. It doesn't matter. But right now, top 3 for you, Bay Area hardcore bands.
Oh, boy. Okay. So let's see here. Oh, this is a way harder question.
Okay. Hardcore punk. You can also include punk too. So hardcore and punk.
Such a harder question. Okay, so look, just because they're trying to make a comeback, I'm going to go with Powerhouse.
Respect.
There's something happening there. I saw some social media posts that there's some running going on. So that's always cool. I think, from back in the day, one of the bands that I really respect, and this is going back to that conversation you had about not sort of resting on your laurels and finding ways to continue to challenge yourself. And this is the band Ceremony, where, back when Allegiance was playing, this band blew up huge, really, really fantastic band, awesome people, such a great mindset and an ethos. And if you listen to their last record, it is nothing like their first record, and it's amazing. It's still great, right? So this is a band that truly has not sat down, right? They continue to challenge themselves. Oh, and a third, I'm so loath to pick a third because it means that I it's going to be like the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Anybody could have been there. So I'm going to leave the third, and all of the Bay Area bands could have been the third. I like that concept. And instead, I think I'll just say my favorite kind of punk hardcore aggressive band is another sort of ever evolving, never dead band, Converge, which they've been a band for who knows, 80 years, and just continue to do awesome things, not just with their band but with art and recording. And it's inspiring to see people kind of take something that could have been just a flash and pan part of their life and turn it into so much more.
Yeah, man, I love those answers. So Powerhouse, like, huge respect. I'm super psyched they're coming back. Like, I think that's so awesome. And like a band that kind of got lost a little bit in time, but was like unbelievable band. So that's cool. Ceremony, like, I mean, in a lot of ways, they're like the last great punk band. Like, their records get more punk, in my opinion. Not sounding, but like from an ethos perspective, the way they approach it, like they're just like, this a real band, and never put out a bad record. I'd even go so far as to say never recorded a bad song. And then, of course, Converge, like sick. It's like so great. All right, last question. Our audience is kind of an interesting crossroads of people. So we get like straight up total corporate people who've never even heard of like Ceremony or Converge or any of these bands. We get lots of corporate people. We get people from the punk and hardcore scene. We get artists. We get athletes. We get social workers. It's really started to become a landing place for people who are interested in one thing, and that thing is leadership. So if this podcast is really about anything, it's about leadership in all of the different ways it shows up. You know, as I've known you throughout time, you're just a leader. You know, you've always just been like a guy that stood out to me as someone who marches their own path, but with just so much like respect and caring, compassion. You could be different from your next person without being a jerk. And it's just been cool to watch you grow and to know you. Today, what can you share with us about your philosophy about leadership?
I think that if it came down to one word, and it's not just about leadership, but it's so much of your life, I would say transparency, right? Mm-hmm. And transparency means so many things, and it encapsulates things like honesty and things like, you know, consistency and knowing, you know, yourself and your situation and so on, and communication, right? But it's also requires intelligence, because transparency at a leadership level isn't always you tell everybody everything. Right? It can't be. And so it's about finding, you know, a way to communicate, bring people in, don't exclude people, don't gatekeep, but you create an environment where people feel like they're engaged, feel like they're, you know, one of and not excluded, and where people can work and trust and devote themselves because they feel like they really know, you know, what everybody's up to. And so I think transparency and trying to find that, you know, both as you report up through a structure and out from a structure and, you know, through all of your colleagues and all of the team members. I think that's probably the place, one, where I see people fall down the most, and one that I've really spent a lot of time focused on trying to feel out how that works for me.
Man, that's so awesome. All right, as we're closing off, any last words?
Circle pit.
Finally.
We've got. No, but I wanted to say it the whole time, and I just never had the opportunity. You know, so I wanted to get that out there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it hasn't come up at all so far, and you got to end strong. Thank you so much for being on the show. You know, what's cool about this conversation is like we covered a lot of professional stuff, which is important, a lot of industry stuff, but also just what makes you tick as a professional person. And I think there's just such value in just saying like, man, like, you know, I am who I am. I'm continuing to grow. I'm continuing to work on myself. I want to get value from other people, and I can add value. And a lot of that has to do with coming from punk and hardcore, but it also has to do with finding your way in a world that's not solely based on those rules. And again, it's just been great to see you develop as a person and as a professional. And thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, that's all mutual. And thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
You bet. All right, everyone. We'll hit some closing thoughts in our outro. And Spencer, drop the beat.